My name is Dorothy. I'm 72 years old, and I know the exact day everything changed. It was April 14th, 1997, a Tuesday, the kind of day that feels like nothing while you're living it. Gray sky, cool morning, I made oatmeal, I ironed a blouse, I kissed my husband Richard on the cheek before he left for work, same as I always did. By the time he came home that evening, we were different people. I didn't know it then. You never do. But that was the day, the exact day, and I've spent 25 years trying to understand what happened in those few hours that I can never get back. I'm not telling this story because I think it'll help anyone. I don't know if it will. I'm telling it because I'm running out of time to say it out loud, and I need to hear myself admit what I've known for years but never quite let myself believe. I was a good wife. That's what everyone said. I kept a clean house. I cooked dinner every night. I supported Richard through 2 career changes, 3 moves, and more bad moods than I can count. We had 2 daughters. We had a life that looked, from the outside, like it was working, and for a long time I thought that was enough. I thought if I just kept doing the things a good wife does, the feelings would follow. The closeness, the understanding, the warmth I saw in other couples when they looked at each other across a room. But they didn't, and on April 14th, 1997, I finally said something about it. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Dinner was over. The girls were upstairs doing homework. Richard was reading the newspaper, half folded, propped against the sugar bowl. He did that every night. I don't remember what made me say it. Maybe I'd been holding it too long. Maybe I just got tired. I said, "Richard, do you ever feel like we're just going through the motions?" He didn't look up right away. He finished the sentence he was reading, folded the corner of the page, set the paper down slowly, the way you handle something fragile. Then he looked at me, and he said, "What do you mean?" I should have known from the way he said it. Careful, guarded, like he was already protecting himself from whatever I was about to say. But I kept going. I said, "I just feel like we don't really talk anymore. Not about anything that matters. We live in the same house, we sleep in the same bed, but I don't know what you're thinking. I don't know what you want. I don't even know if you're happy." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm fine, Dorothy." And I said, "But are you happy?" He looked at me like I'd asked him something unreasonable, something that didn't have an answer. He said, "I don't know what you want me to say." I didn't know either. I just wanted him to say something real, something that wasn't fine or okay or don't worry about it. I wanted him to tell me what he felt, even if it hurt, even if it was messy. But he didn't. He picked up the newspaper again and said, "I think you're overthinking this." And that was it. That was the conversation. I sat there for a few more minutes waiting for him to say something else, to ask me why I'd brought it up, to care enough to keep talking. But he didn't. So I got up. I cleared the plates. I washed the dishes. I went upstairs and helped our youngest with her math homework. And we never talked about it again. I thought that was the end of it. I thought we'd just go back to normal, that I'd said my piece and now we could move on. But something shifted that night. Not loud, not obvious, just a small, quiet distance that started to grow. Richard became more careful around me, more polite. He started asking if I needed anything before he sat down to read. He'd offer to help with dinner, even though he never had before. He'd say thank you for small things, little gestures that felt like apologies for something he wouldn't name. And I started watching him. I started noticing how he'd pause before answering questions, how he'd glance at me sometimes like he was checking to see if I was upset, how he'd stay late at work more often, not because he had to, but because it was easier than being home. We were more polite to each other than we'd ever been. and we were further apart than we'd ever been. I didn't understand it then. I thought if I just gave it time, things would settle, that we'd find our way back to whatever we'd had before. But you can't go back to something you never really had. The years kept passing. The girls graduated, got married, moved away. Richard retired. We had more time together than we'd ever had, and less to say. We'd sit in the living room in the evenings, him with his book, me with mine, and the silence felt so heavy I could barely breathe. But I didn't say anything, because I was afraid that if I brought it up again, he'd shut down even more. Afraid that if I pushed too hard, something would break that I wouldn't be able to fix. So I stayed quiet. And so did he. It wasn't until 3 years ago that I started to understand what happened that day. Richard had a stroke, a small one. The doctors said he was lucky. He recovered. He could still walk, still talk, still do most things on his own. But something changed. He became softer, not weaker, just less defended. One afternoon we were sitting on the back porch. It was late summer. The light was gold and slanted, the way it gets just before evening. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think about that night a lot." I didn't have to ask which night. I said, "Me too." He looked out at the yard, at the trees we'd planted 30 years ago, and he said, "I didn't know what to say to you." I waited. He said, "You asked me if I was happy, and I didn't know how to tell you that I didn't know, that I'd stopped asking myself that question a long time ago, that I thought happiness was something other people had, not something I was supposed to expect." His voice cracked a little. He said, "I thought if I told you that, you'd leave." I felt something break open in my chest. I said, "Richard, I wasn't asking so I could leave. I was asking because I wanted to stay. But I wanted to stay with you, not just the version of you that showed up every day and went through the motions." He nodded slowly. He said, "I know that now. We talked more that day than we had in 25 years. He told me he'd been scared his whole life, scared of being too much, scared of being not enough, scared that if he let anyone see what he really felt, they'd realize he wasn't worth the trouble. I told him I'd been scared too, that I thought if I asked for more, I'd be selfish, that I'd learned early to make myself small, to not need too much, to be grateful for whatever I got. And we sat there, two people in their 70s, finally saying the things we should have said when we were 47. Richard died last year, peacefully, in his sleep, the way everyone hopes it happens. And I'm grateful we had those last 3 years. I'm grateful we finally talked. But I can't stop thinking about all the years we didn't. All the evenings we sat in silence because we were too afraid to ask each other the hard questions. All the moments we could have been close, really close, if we'd just been brave enough to risk it. I know the exact day everything changed. April 14th, 1997. But what I didn't know then was that the change wasn't in what I said. It was in what happened after. It was in the choice we both made, over and over, to stay safe instead of staying connected. I used to think the problem was that one conversation, that if I'd said it differently, or waited for a better time, or not said it at all, things would have turned out better. But that's not true. The problem wasn't the conversation. The problem was that we let it end there. We let one uncomfortable moment convince us that it was better not to try, and we spent 25 years proving ourselves right. I think about the younger version of me sometimes, sitting at that kitchen table, trying so hard to say something true. I want to tell her that it's going to be okay, that she'll get another chance. But I also want to tell her not to stop there, not to let his silence mean the conversation is over, not to let fear win just because it's easier. I want to tell her that love isn't just showing up. It's asking the hard questions, even when you don't know what the answer will be. It's staying in the discomfort long enough to find each other on the other side. It's choosing truth over peace, connection over comfort, again and again and again. But I can't tell her that. She's gone, and so is he.